There's a claim three completely different fields keep landing on, that something in us wants to be like God. Theology says it plainly. Psychology arrives at it from a different angle. Philosophy pushes it further than either. Is that true? And if it is it something that happens to us, or is it just who we are? They don't all agree, not even with themselves. I'm starting with the version that's been on the books the longest, the religious one, because it says the most, then looping back for what psychology and philosophy each add to it. Stick with me. Theology's version starts back in Genesis. Humanity made in the image of God, made to reflect something whole. Later, when the first two people reach for that likeness on their own terms, instead of receiving it, that is, Eve and Adam, when they were with the serpent in the garden, God's own reaction doesn't deny it worked. The man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, God said. Something real was achieved, which means wanting to be God-like was never the issue. And that invitation doesn't stop there either. Be holy because I am holy, God says in Leviticus. Be imitators of God, Paul writes in Ephesians. Inside a letter otherwise concerned with how to treat a spouse, a child, even someone enslaved to you. Same invitation, centuries apart, both times buried in the middle of ordinary instructions about how to live with other people. Handed back as something to grow into, not shut down as a threat. And we'll get to what psychology and philosophy each call this in a minute. Except it isn't unconditional either way. There's a king in Isaiah who wants the exact same thing, to be like the Most High, and it gets condemned outright there. It's originally aimed at a king of Babylon, but the ambition described, wanting to sit above everyone else, including God, reads as a case study either way. The difference isn't the want, it's whether it's received or seized. The king in Isaiah wasn't reaching toward God. He was reaching for God's position to replace him, not connect with him. So what changed on this account is where the wanting is coming from. It was never supposed to be self-supplied, but when the connection is dependent on what wasn't there, the drive didn't disappear. It just started generating everything on its own certainty, its own significance, its own proof that it matters. That's the curve. Incurvatus in se. The self turned in on itself instead of staying open, orbiting its own need instead of actually reaching anywhere. You can see it in ordinary places. A parent who can't admit they're wrong in front of their kid, generating their own certainty, the kind that's supposed to come from God's own knowledge, because nothing else is supplying it anymore. A partner who does everything and asks for nothing, generating their own self-sufficiency instead of letting anyone else carry something for them, reaching for a kind of independence that was only ever supposed to belong to God. Someone who can't let a person they love make a decision they know for sure is wrong, generating their own version of control over how someone else's story turns out. Control that was never actually theirs to have. Someone who only ever shows the highlight reel and never the year where they barely got through each day, generating their own significance instead of actually being known, chasing a kind of glory that isn't really available to manufacture. None of these are the only way to explain any single one of them. There's always a simpler way to describe it as well. Fear, shame, or just wanting control. But underneath a lot of it, this shape turns up as well. Theology's answer for what it looks like when it doesn't land that way shows up directly in the Gospels. After 40 days without food, Jesus gets offered this same thing in the wilderness. Turn stones into bread and meet his own needs without waiting on anyone, throw himself down and force God to prove himself. Take every kingdom on earth right now, no waiting required. What does he do? He turns down all three. Later, in Philippians, describes him holding real equality with God and not gripping it for his own advantage. Harpagmos is the word used, something you clutch and use for leverage. He emptied himself instead, kenosis, and even washed his own followers' feet, the lowest servant's job in the house. That specificity matters too. The text doesn't just say be like God in the abstract, it says be like Jesus specifically. Paul talks about believers being shaped into that image. John says anyone claiming to follow him should live the way he lived. Be like God on its own is a blank check. Everyone fills it in with their own idea of what God-like looks like, what usually ends up looking like their own ideal self. And Jesus leaves a lot less room for that. That whole account depends on there being a connection to lose in the first place. Psychology doesn't think there ever was one. Ernest Becker's version, from the anthropologist side, humans are the one animal that fully knows it's going to die. And that knowledge is a lot for a creature built to survive. So it builds immortality projects, like a career that outlasts a lifetime, children who carry a name forward, a cause important enough that fighting for it makes an individual life feel bigger than itself, art or a building or company with your name on the front door, anything that lets a person feel like they'll still be here in some form after they're not. You can see a small version of it in someone who can't stop working long after they don't need to, because retirement feels like disappearing. So there's always one more project, because stopping means finally sitting with the fact that none of this gets carried past the finish line. Self-esteem on this account was never vanity. It's the psychology managing that. Researchers actually tested Becker's idea directly. Remind people of death, even if just for a flicker, barely noticed, and they reliably tighten their grip on their worldview, their group, their sense of being one of the most important ones. That was one of the most replicated findings of social psychology for years, and what's now called terror management theory. Though more recent, larger attempts to reproduce it have found weaker, less consistent effects. Becker himself never fully closed the door on theology, though. He thought some immortality projects were more honest than others, and he leaned toward thinking the steadiest version might actually be a religious one, which puts him closer to the theological camp than you'd expect from someone diagnosing the mechanism. The evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers takes it in a purely evolutionary direction, a different mechanism entirely. He argues self-deception evolved because you're more convincing to other people when you actually believe your own story. In courtship, in forming alliances, in convincing a room full of people to follow you instead of someone else. So a bias toward thinking more yourself than the evidence supports might not be a flaw. It might be a strategy that works. You can see it in the coworker who's genuinely convinced they're the most capable person in the room, not faking the confidence, actually feeling it, and somehow that's exactly what gets other people to go along with it. And there's data that fits. The psychologist Roy Baumeister and others have found that when you ask people to rate themselves against everyone else on almost any positive trait, more people land above average than the math should really allow. Neither Becker's version nor Trivers is describing a self going wrong. They're describing what a mortal, self-aware, socially competitive creature does, more or less automatically just by existing. That still makes it a fact about a certain kind of creature, something biology and psychology happen to produce one way or another. Philosophy asks a harder question, whether it's built into what a self is, period, regardless of how it got there. Jean-Paul Sartre took this all the way, in Being and Nothingness. He argued human consciousness isn't a fixed thing at all. It's defined by lack, always reaching past whatever it currently is. This is what Sartre called being condemned to freedom. No fixed nature to fall back on, only the ongoing work of becoming, with nothing solid underneath any of it. It's the particular exhaustion of realizing no one else is going to hand you a fixed answer of who you're supposed to be, that every choice is just another vote for yourself forever, with nothing to fall back on once you stop voting. And the actual project underneath every human consciousness, he said, is to become fully free and fully complete at the same time. Its own foundation, needing nothing outside itself to explain or ground it. By his own definition, that's just what God would be. His conclusion, that project can't ever succeed, not because it's forbidden, but because free and complete don't fit together in the same thing at once. It's not just that reaching for it doesn't work out. By Sartre's logic, the very idea of something being both at once is incoherent, which is part of his actual case for why a being like that can't exist in the first place, not just why chasing it fails. Either way, the gap isn't missing an ingredient. It's built into what it means to be a self that's aware of itself. Not every philosopher who reaches the same conclusion holds it the same way, though. Friedrich Nietzsche starts from the same place as Sartre. No transcendence, nothing outside of the self to build on, and even agrees meaning has to be self-made, with nothing else to appeal to. But he holds that condition completely differently. Sartre frames it as a weight, the anguish of being fully responsible for a foundation you don't actually have. Nietzsche insists that's the wrong response. Not tragedy, but something closer to joy. He even proposed a kind of test for it. Imagine living this exact life over again forever with nothing changed. If that thought crushes you, you haven't made peace with having no foundation. If you could actually want it, that's the honest response he was after. Dancing, laughing, saying yes to exactly this, instead of carrying it like a burden. It's the difference between someone who resents having to reinvent themselves every single day and someone who actually seems to enjoy it. Building a life, a business, a way of thinking without waiting for anyone's permission first. So here's the actual question underneath all of this. Is this drive something that happened to us, or is it just who we are? On that specific point, that's a real flat disagreement. Theology says something happened, a connection broke. Psychology and philosophy, whatever else they disagree about, agree that nothing broke. This is just what a mortal, self-aware social creature is from the start. Both of those can't be true at once. Every relatable moment in this episode, the parent, the partner, the highlight reel, reads differently depending on which one you believe. But even the side that says nothing broke doesn't agree with itself about how to hold that. Sartre calls it anguish, a weight, a responsibility for a foundation that was never actually there. Nietzsche calls the same realization an occasion for something closer to joy, insisting the weight is the wrong response entirely. And Becker, the one who started this whole psychological account, spent his own career not fully sure which side of that he landed on either. 4 people looking at the same drive, landing in different places, and not always along the lines you'd expect. Which one's right isn't something this episode is going to settle, but it's worth knowing you're not the only one still working it out.